Most people grow up believing that crises happen suddenly. That one day the world is fine and the next everything collapses. That's how news tells the story. That's how history books summarize it. But that version is meant for the public, not for people who want to understand how the world actually works. Crises aren't random explosions. They're slow, predictable, and almost always deliberate. And the part that never gets mentioned? The part carefully removed from every timeline is the transition phase right before the collapse. Stage 4.5. Stage 4.5 is the blind corridor of every major economic and societal breakdown. It's the period when the system has already shifted its weight, when insiders have already started preparing but the public still believes nothing is wrong. This is the phase no one talks about because it exposes something uncomfortable, that collapses don't to strike everyone equally. They don't hit at the same time. They hit last and hardest on the people who recognize the danger the latest. And stage 4.5 exists to make sure most people recognize it too late. The truth is that stage 4.5 is not calm before the storm, it's asset migration. When the system senses structural failure, it begins pushing risk outward. Big institutions offload toxic positions to smaller funds. Smaller funds sell them to retail investors. The retail crowd, believing the market is stabilizing, absorbs the danger that the insiders are quietly abandoning. This process happens every single time in every single crisis. But it's never written explicitly in textbooks because it reveals a truth the system doesn't want you to internalize. Risk doesn't disappear. It just moves from the informed to the uninformed. This is why the myth of unexpected collapse is so convenient. If people believe crises are unpredictable, they don't ask why certain groups always manage to be out before the collapse hits. If people think everything happens suddenly, they don't question why large players always manage to exit just in time. Stage 4.5 must remain invisible for the illusion of fairness to survive. Here is the insight that stays with you once you understand it. The system doesn't protect everyone. It protects those who see the rotation early, those who recognize stage 4.5 for what it is. Everyone else is positioned to take the fall. Another thing rarely discussed is the psychological engineering behind this stage. Humans respond to uncertainty in two primary ways: panic or denial. Panic destabilizes the system too early. Denial stabilizes it just long enough for insiders to reposition. Stage 4.5 is engineered denial. It's the quiet period designed to keep the majority calm, unfocused, and unreactive, while the minority moves quickly and silently. That's why data gets smoothed. That's why indicators get adjusted. That's why media distractions rise at the exact moment structural data turns negative. It's not a coincidence. It's a mechanism. And this mechanism works because it weaponizes time. Time is the most underestimated factor in every crisis. Not price, not charts, not forecasts. Time. Stage 4.5 doesn't hide the collapse. It delays the moment you realize it's coming. That delay is enough for the system to shift risk off its balance sheet and onto yours. That's why most investors, families, and businesses don't fail during the crisis. They fail in the transition because they think they still have time. There's another truth most people don't realize. Crises don't destroy wealth. They transfer it. Wealth doesn't evaporate. Ownership changes hands. People who are prepared buy what the unprepared are forced to sell. People who see stage 4.5 accumulate power while those who ignore it lose theirs. That's why after every major downturn, the gap between the top 1% and everyone else widens dramatically. It's not because the rich survived the collapse, it's because they understood the transition. Stage 4.5 is also the phase when narratives begin to diverge. Insiders start speaking in half sentences and technical language. Public officials become vague. Reports use soft words like moderation, temporary adjustments, or below-trend activity, phrases that mean nothing but sound harmless enough to keep people numb. Meanwhile, actual risk builds quietly beneath the surface. When you compare the language used privately and the language used publicly during this phase, the contrast is shocking. Internally, we're reducing exposure. Publicly, the outlook remains stable. One of the most important shifts in stage 4.5 is this. Institutions stop trying to solve the problem and start trying to survive it. You can track it in their behavior if you know where to look. They stop making long-term commitments. They hoard liquidity, they cut expansion plans, they adjust credit standards. They reduce leverage as quietly as possible. None of this is visible to retail-level data consumers, but it's crystal clear to anyone who has ever worked inside the system. And once that shift begins, the collapse is no longer a question of if, only when. The public, however, experiences a very different reality. Their first signs aren't financial, they're emotional. They start noticing that things feel off. Groceries rising unexpectedly. Bills creeping upward. Paychecks feeling smaller. Debt heavier. Yet every headline reassures them that the economy is resilient. This mismatch, what they feel versus what they're told, is the psychological signature of stage 4.5. It's the moment when intuition and official narratives begin to diverge. Most people ignore their intuition. They trust the data graphs, and that's exactly why they get hit the hardest. Stage 4.5 is also when businesses, especially small ones, unknowingly step into the tightest squeeze. Their input costs rise gradually, customer spending weakens, inventory turns slower. Credit becomes slightly harder to renew. But none of these signs look critical on their own. The danger is cumulative. By the time they connect the dots, they are already in stage 5, and at that point reaction is too late. Understanding stage 4.5 is the only way to catch the shift early enough to adapt. Society as a whole begins drifting into a state of quiet tension during this phase. It's like the collective version of holding your breath without knowing why. Conversations about money increase, but certainty decreases. People notice others struggling, but no one calls it a trend. These early fractures are always social before they are economic. The numbers crack last. People crack first. And here is the insight almost no one talks about. The greatest danger of stage 4.5 is not financial, it's cognitive. Once your ability to detect risk is dulled by engineered calm, you lose the most important advantage any person can have during a transition, the ability to move early. By the time panic replaces denial, the window for strategic action is gone. When you truly study the anatomy of a collapse, not through headlines but through internal memos, policy reactions, market behavior, and human psychology, you begin to notice something unsettling. The chaos at the end is always preceded by a period of order that is too perfect, too polished, too quiet. Stage 4.5 is that deceptive order. It is not a flaw in the system. It is how the system buys time. And the people who misunderstand this phase always end up learning the lesson when there is nothing left to protect. One of the clearest signs of stage 4.5 is the shift in communication patterns from institutions. They don't announce fear. They soften their vocabulary. They stop making bold statements about the future. Their reports become vague, padded with neutral phrases. Words like robust growth are replaced with steady outlook. Strong fundamentals become mixed indicators. These changes seem harmless, but they reflect an internal reality. The system has already moved from confidence to caution. Institutions speak in calm tones precisely when they are the most nervous. This linguistic shrinkage is not decoration, it's a defensive signal. The public tends to miss these signals because they've been conditioned to focus on outcomes, not conditions. If the collapse hasn't happened yet, they assume the system is functioning, but crises don't work like explosions. They work like erosion. By the time the public sees the first crack, the foundation has already been hollowed out for months. Stage 4.5 is the hollowing. One of the strongest, most reliable indicators of stage 4.5 is contradiction. It shows up everywhere once you learn to detect it. Inflation reports say prices are cooling, yet your daily expenses rise. Job numbers look strong, yet more people around you complain about layoffs or reduced hours. Markets appear stable, yet liquidity dries quietly behind the scenes. These contradictions aren't glitches. They are evidence that the surface and the structure are no longer aligned. Whenever perception and reality diverge, stage 4.5 is already underway. Another defining feature of this phase is the heavy use of short-term interventions, actions that stabilize the present at the expense of the future. Interest rate pivots, liquidity injections, emergency credit facilities, temporary tax adjustments. These tactics are not designed to solve anything. They are designed to delay the visible symptoms. The system applies patches so the public remains calm long enough for insiders to reposition. The irony is that the public mistakes these patches as proof of resilience when in fact they are proof of fragility. This brings us to the part very few ever understand. During stage 4.5, insiders aren't analyzing whether a crisis will happen, they preparing for how they will enter it. It's not prediction, it's positioning. Big players reduce leverage, diversify cash positions, restructure debt, delay expansions, and shift into more defensive assets. None of this appears dramatically on charts because it happens in increments, quietly, methodically. But behind the scenes, the system is already bracing. The collapse is not sudden, only awareness is. The majority of people lose not during the collapse but during stage 4.5 because they interpret the delay as safety. They wait for confirmation. They wait for an official announcement. They wait for the picture to become clear enough, but clarity only arrives after damage becomes irreversible. Stage 4.5 rewards those who act early and punishes those who wait. That is the brutal efficiency of transitions. So what does the end of stage 4.5 look like? It doesn't look explosive, it looks like alignment. The scattered signals suddenly start pointing in the same direction. Markets stop reacting to good news. Policy tools lose potency. Consumer sentiment weakens, the tone of financial institutions turns somber. Households start feeling the pressure directly. Shrinking purchasing power, rising bills, tightening credit. This is the emotional breakpoint where internal conditions become external reality. And once that psychological line snaps, stage 5 begins. In stage 5, individuals feel the impact first because their margins are smallest. A family that could handle 3 unexpected expenses a year now struggles with 1. A household that once felt stable suddenly realizes their budget no longer has breathing room. The cost of food, rent, healthcare, energy, and debt servicing all rise faster than wages. This quiet squeeze is how collapse enters daily life. Not with drama, but with pressure that grows silently. Businesses feel the impact next. Large corporations may endure longer thanks to cash reserves and diversified revenue, but small and mid-sized businesses, those closest to everyday consumers, get hit fast. Demand softens, inventory slows, credit becomes harder to access. Operating costs climb. And because these businesses are essential to the fabric of the economy, their strain soon becomes visible at the societal level. Stage 5 isn't just financial, it's operational. When circulation slows, everything slows. Society experiences the final stage not because it is unaffected until then, but because social awareness lags behind economic reality. Public sentiment changes last but hits the hardest. You begin to see fear replacing denial. People postpone purchases. They talk more about savings and less about ambition. Conversations shift from opportunity to protection. Community stress rises. Trust declines. And once collective confidence breaks, the system enters a downward loop that becomes increasingly hard to reverse. Here is the value no mainstream explanation will ever give you. The collapse is not the destruction. It is the redistribution. Crises don't erase wealth, they relocate it. They move assets from the unprepared to the prepared, from the slow to the fast, from the unaware to the aware. This isn't cynicism, it is structural mathematics. In every transition, someone is forced to sell and someone is positioned to buy. Understanding stage 4.5 is what determines which side of that equation you stand on. The deeper truth is this: collapses widen inequality not because the rich cheat, but because they recognize the transition early. They do not wait for certainty. They read the conditions, they adapt during the quiet phase. Meanwhile, most people act only when the noise becomes loud enough to force them. By that time, the structural advantage has already shifted. Stage 4.5 is not about predicting doom. It's about recognizing timing. The difference between being flattened by a crisis and rising from it is not luck, it is awareness. A person who sees the shift early doesn't need to predict perfectly. They only need to avoid being the last one standing when the music stops. The most important insight: transitions are not only systemic, they are personal. Stage 4.5 tests your ability to interpret signals, overcome denial, and make uncomfortable decisions. 2 people can live through the same external event and walk away with completely different outcomes based solely on how they responded during the transition. The system has its cycle, but every individual has their own cycle of reaction: noticing, questioning, deciding, acting. Most people stop at noticing. Stage 4.5 exploits that hesitation more than anything else. If you take only one truth from all of this, let it be this: you are not powerless during transitions. The system does not predetermine your outcome. Your position does. Stability is not a guarantee, it is a narrative. And narratives are loudest when systems are weakest. The world always shifts silently before anyone admits it. And the silence right now is unmistakable.